Good evening again. It's a pleasure to be here tonight representing Boys and Girls Clubs of America, but more importantly to have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Robbie Bach as your guest speaker. I won't read everything about Robbie from the program, but however, I do think it's very important that we mention that he definitely has North Carolina roots. Robbie graduated from R.J. Reynolds High School, and he holds a degree from economics from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and then he also has an MBA from Stanford University. Robbie's the former president of Entertainment and Devices Division of Microsoft Corporation and was responsible for everything from small business marketing and OEM programs to major product launches and marketing for the Microsoft's families of productivity applications. The vision of, you've heard a lot about the Boys and Girls Club tonight, but the vision of the Boys and Girls Club Great Futures Impact Plan is to provide a world-class club experience, just like you've been seeing tonight, that assures success is within reach of every young person that comes through our doors, with all members on track to graduate from high school with a plan for the future and demonstrating good character and citizenship and living a healthy lifestyle. Robbie Bach embraces that vision in his work through all the young people that he sees. The compassion that Robbie displays comes completely directly from his heart. Robbie served on the board of directors of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Bellevue, Washington for over a decade before he became the chairperson of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America Board of Governors. He joined the Board of Governors in 2005, and he is the chairman emeritus. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Robbie Bach.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I'm a bit of a pacer, so I'll be moving kind of around the podium here tonight. First, I want to start by thanking Sylvia Adams, Tina Carson-Wilkins, and Major Jim Allison for inviting me here. This is a homecoming for me. And tonight's talk will be about homecoming. Now, I grew up in the Midwest mostly, but we moved to North Carolina when I was in between my 7th and 8th grade year. And I'm a really fortunate person. I had two wonderful parents, some brothers and sisters who were mostly pretty good to me. We had a wonderful family, and we have a wonderful family. There's now 40 of us. We get together every year. And I feel like I have home here anytime I want to be here. And now my brothers and sisters will remind you that I was what we Catholics call a mistake. I was 7.5 years after my last sibling. So I'm the youngest. Now my mom, who is here and will be celebrating her 90th birthday this year, so congratulations to my mom. Now, my mom says that I wasn't a mistake, I was a blessing. And I will tell you that I feel very blessed to be back home. But the subject of my talk tonight is about the people who, when they think about home, don't think of things as a blessing. And when you think my parents were raised during the Depression, it's a difficult time to raise kids. If you raised kids during World War II, during the Vietnam era. There have been difficult times to raise kids throughout American history. But to me, it seems like now things are more difficult than ever. If you're a single parent trying to raise kids, if you're two parents with two jobs trying to raise kids, if you're a single parent with two jobs trying to raise kids, the pressures in the economy, the pressures of life have never been greater. And that leaves aside the very sad reality that we also have situations of neglect and abuse. And our kids have to live through that and have to think of that as their home. And so when I reflect on the blessings of my home, I ask the question, what about those who don't have those blessings? When I joined the National Board of Governors for Boys and Girls Club of America, I had perhaps the most emotional experience I've ever had at a board meeting. Board meetings aren't particularly emotional to begin with. but we had a group of kids come who were former gang members. They came from across the country, and they came to talk to us about gang life and how the Boys and Girls Club saved them from gangs. And one of our board members asked a very important question. It was a young woman who's 17 years old, and he said, "You knew being in a gang was wrong. Why did you join the gang?" And she said, "That's the first time anybody said I mattered. Somebody showed me that they cared, and so I joined the gang." That to me is a very impactful and powerful statement. And it really tells you that we have not just a challenge here in Winston-Salem, or a challenge in Raleigh or Charlotte, or in Seattle where I grew up, or where I live, where my kids grew up, in Chicago or New York. We have a national problem of youth. I'm here to tell you, unfortunately, that I think we are experiencing the lost generation of youth. A generation of youth who are going to miss out on a productive life. And that, to me, is a great, great tragedy. So when you look at the numbers, when the school bell rings at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, 15 million kids in the United States have no place to go. That's a tragedy. If you think about summer, a time of enrichment and enjoyment for kids, over 40 million kids get no enrichment, no enjoyment during the summer. And you know what happens? We know mathematically what happens. The next year they come back in school 6 months behind their classmates who have been enriched over the summer. And that repeats year after year. And by the time they get to 9th grade, they're 4 grades behind. And they drop out. 25% of high school-aged youth in the United States will not graduate from high school. And if you are a child of color, that number is closer to 40%. Just for a moment, think of the economic cost of that and the burden it puts on our society going forward. And then step back and put your heart in the right place and think of the emotional cost that that brings. This is the challenge of a lost generation. So now, when I worked at Microsoft for 22 years, I had a very fortunate, wonderful career. Along the way, I had lots of mentors and a lot of support. I already talked about my family as a support function and as mentors. I talked about what that meant to me growing up. At Microsoft, I learned from so many wonderful people, and I learned great things. And when I retired from Microsoft 4 years ago, I said I want to do something that has impact. I want to do something that is not just about making money or making a business successful. I want to do something that impacts society. And so I stepped back, and if you someday are really bored at your computer and you want to go to www.robbiebach.com, you'll find out what I'm up to. And I've taken on a new title, and my new title is Civic Engineer. Now, what does it mean to be a civic engineer? It turns out I come from a family of civic engineers. I'm not sure they even know that, but I come from a family of civic engineers. Civic engineers are people who get engaged in society, look at problems, and try to help solve them. And that can be anything, can be a wide range of things. My brother's here tonight. He's a successful career at IBM. He likes to build houses, so he works with Habitat for Humanity and does great work there. My older sister, and we're always quick to remind her that she is the eldest, couldn't be here with us tonight, but she has spent her entire life as a lawyer representing people who could not find anybody to represent them. And she believes deeply in her heart that everyone, whether she thinks they're guilty or innocent, deserves to be represented. My other sister, the middle sister, Mary, is here tonight. And she is a civic engineer of one of what I think of as the most passionate and noble causes in civic engineering. She's a teacher. These are powerful jobs. I have big shoes to fill in my family if I want to be a civic engineer. And so I stepped back and I said, well, what did I learn at Microsoft that could help me be a better civic engineer? And most of what I learned at Microsoft was about strategy and how to take really complicated problems and make them simple and come up with a common sense approach for solving those problems. So when we think about a lost generation of youth, that to me is a very complicated problem. And we need to come up with common sense solutions for how we address that problem. So a large part of what I do now is take a strategic framework I use, which I call the 3P framework. You'll understand pretty obviously why in a moment, and apply that to these complex social problems. So the 3P framework is really simple. It starts with the first P, which is purpose. When you have a problem, what's the purpose in trying to solve it? What are you trying to do? I think in the corporate world, I work with a company called Sonos. Anybody here use Sonos speakers? They're wireless speaker systems. If not, we better do better marketing in North Carolina. I'll start working on that soon. In any event, Sonos thinks their purpose in life is to bring all the world's music into every room in your house. If you're an employee at that company, you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And so when I think about complex social problems, I think we have to be very clear about our purpose and understand exactly what we're trying to accomplish. So that's purpose. Second thing you get to is principles. It's the second part of the strategic framework. And if you're going to think about principles, you have to be able to write down, and I will tell you, you only get 5 principles on a subject. If you have more than 5 principles, you're not a very principled person, so we can dispense with that. You got to have 5 at most. And these 5 principles are sort of the rules of the road, the culture you want to use, the decision-making process you want to use in deciding what you're going to do to attack this problem that you're addressing. In the business world, I think of Walmart. If you talk to a Walmart employee, they will tell you a core principle of the company is lowest price every day. And I will tell you, you go to visit their headquarters, it is a lowest price everyday headquarters. I can promise you that. And so principles are those kind of core values you have that support the purpose, which leads us to our final P, which is priorities. And in that final P, you are deciding the specific initiatives you want to pursue to address this complicated problem. Now, again, you only get 5 of those because if you have more than 5 priorities, you don't actually have any priorities. You just have a lot of things you're trying to do. And so this 3P framework, you write it down. I've done this in business. You write 3 pages. You get no more than 3 pages. What's your purpose? What are your principles? What are your priorities? And you'd be amazed, A, how hard it is to write that in 3 pages. But B, once you've done it, the clarity it brings to the things you're trying to accomplish. It forces you to make decisions. It forces you to make trade-offs. It clears away all the rubble of the complexity of these decisions and brings them into focus. We took an entire business. When we started the Xbox, the first version of Xbox lost $7 billion. I think I hold the record at Microsoft for losing the most money in a 5-year period. The second version of that product, which is when we developed this 3P framework, made billions of dollars and was the #1 video game console in its generation. And it wasn't only because of this framework, but I would tell you we had a very complex problem. We simplified it, and we made huge progress. It was a gigantic rallying cry for what we wanted to have happen. So that's the framework. Now I want to return to that lost generation that I talked about earlier. Before us tonight, you heard the solutions to that lost generation. You saw it in the singing, in the playing, in the musical instruments. You saw it in the Youth of the Year award. The Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club of Winston-Salem is a collection of civic engineers. It is what they do. They may not think of it that way, but they are a collection of civic engineers. If you think about the 3P framework, let's just go through it and think about everything that gets done in this organization. Now remember, the Salvation Army has been around serving communities for over 100 years. Boys and Girls Club has been around serving communities for over 100 years. The Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club in Winston-Salem has been here since 1938. Incredible service. Boys and Girls Club and the Salvation Army have been working together since 1960 in a national partnership. These are organizations that really know how to tackle these problems. So let's think about it at our 3P framework level. Purpose. Well, if you talk to anybody in the Salvation Army and the Boys and Girls Club, they will tell you it is about getting everything they can to the people who are most in need. And they have lots of some extra complicated words around that, certainly the Boys and Girls Club does. But that's what it's about. Who's most in need, what youth are most in need, and how are we going to get them help? That's simple. That's their purpose. When you talk about principles, I'll highlight 2. The first one of those is mentorship. I will tell you the number one thing that you hear when you talk to a successful club kid is who their mentor was. Every year I go to the National Conference for Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and they have a Hall of Fame, and they induct people who grew up in the Boys and Girls Club and went on to do sometimes famous things, sometimes not famous things, but they went on to be successful in life. And to a person, when they get up to accept their award, every one of them says, when I was in 6th grade, Joe Smith came up and put his arm around me, and he carried me through high school. Or it was Mary Jane. Every one of them had a mentor who got them there. So in this movement, if we're working to solve the problems of a lost generation, our purpose is to find those in need, and one of our principles is to provide them with mentorship and to figure out how that works. A second principle I want to highlight is partnership. We are not going to solve the problems of a lost generation in Washington, D.C. There isn't one organization who's going to solve it. There isn't one group who has all the answers. The problem is too complicated. Instead, what we need to do is we need to build partnerships to solve this problem. And when you think of the Salvation Army and the Boys and Girls Club working together for over 50 years, that is a partnership that lasts, and it's a partnership that works. And it's a partnership that affects kids' lives. It's also the reason why out of 4,000 Boys and Girls Clubs, 200 of them are on Native American lands in partnership with tribal leaders across the country. It's why there's a Boys and Girls Club on every military base for the U.S. Army and Navy and Marine Corps. Think about that. Those kids travel around and move around every 6 months, 12 months, a year. Every place they go, there's a Boys and Girls Club. There's 1,100 Boys and Girls Clubs in public schools in partnership with local school districts. And there's about 300 Boys and Girls Clubs in public housing projects across the country. Boys and Girls Club doesn't try to do it alone, neither does the Salvation Army. This is a partnership to try to make things happen. So, purpose, principles, really important. And the last thing is priorities, and you've seen a bunch of that tonight. I wanted to just highlight 3 which are near and dear to my heart. The first of those is academic excellence. When somewhere between 25 and 40% of our kids aren't going to graduate from high school, we are not going to solve this problem. It's just fact. We have to do a better job getting kids to high school and through high school successfully. And frankly, if you're in the job market today, having a high school diploma is necessary, but probably not sufficient. You may not need a 4-year degree, but you're going to need an associate's degree, you're going to need a trade skill, you're going to need a certification in something. We have to take these kids and help them get there. They have to know it's important, they need support, and we have to make it happen. That's a priority, a first-class priority. Second priority is good citizenship. If you think about a club and you think about what happens 15 years after somebody's there, I promise you that a good number of those members are back in the club volunteering because they have learned the values of good citizenship while they were there. Being engaged in your community is a fundamental attribute of being successful in life. And kids have to learn that, and have to learn it in a club. And if they learn it when they're in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, high school, they'll carry that with them for the rest of their lives. And then what happens is they start helping solve the problem that, at some point they were a part of. And you get this topspin effect, and you get more and more people working on the problem, and suddenly you have so many people working on the problem that the problem starts to go away. It's a powerful effect. The final thing is healthy lifestyles. My wife is a nurse. She's a wellness coach. And she looks at kids and says, are we doing enough to make sure they're growing up in a healthy way? That has to do with diet. It has to do with exercise. It has to do with how they treat their bodies, how they respect other people's bodies, how they respect each other. These are fundamental core values that you would have thought of as family values. And in many respects, they absolutely are family values. But remember, in the lost generation, many of these kids don't have a family. And it's our challenge to give them one. And so I can write the 3-pager for this lost generation. We talked about purpose, we talked about some of the principles, and we talked about some of the priorities. And it's right here tonight. It's with this organization. It's with the organizations represented here. You see it in the faces of the kids who are here this evening with us. So that's what we can accomplish if we get together. we can bring mentorship, we can bring hope, we can bring direction to kids and address this lost generation. So this, I said earlier, this was a homecoming for me. It's an uplifting time for me. It is great to be back in Winston-Salem. But for me, it's great to be back in Winston-Salem with a purpose. So what I want you to do tonight is join me in a little home improvement project. So we're going to see how we can do civic engineering Winston-Salem style tonight. I really want you to take the opportunity to think about how you can be a civic engineer, how you can go one step further in making great things happen. There's been so many people who've been recognized tonight for their generosity, and yet I'm going to stand here on the stage and ask you to be more generous. So let's pause for a moment. How can you be a better civic engineer? Well, the first thing is, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to consider contributing some money. So the first thing you can do to be a better civic engineer is to contribute money this evening. And I hope some of you came with that expectation and are prepared. So that's good. That's a nice foundation. But after seeing what you've seen tonight, and maybe after hearing a little bit of what I have to say, I want you to consider something bigger. I want you to consider doing more than what you plan to give. Maybe give 50% more. Maybe give 100% more. But give more. That would be better. So I'm in sort of the good, better, best belief guy. So that would be better. So maybe give more. But in the best category for me, it's the opportunity for you to give of your time and talent. So many of you, you're here tonight because you already do that. But I need to ask you to do more. Civic engineering is an engagement sport. It's a team sport. It takes a lot of people. It's not just a football team. It's like 5 or 10 football teams. We need everybody engaged. And if it's with the Boys and Girls Club with the Salvation Army, that's awesome. If it's with another organization, that's great too. If it's working in politics, in government, if it's working in a Rotary Club, whatever it is, I ask everybody to think not just what you can give tonight, and I hope you'll be very generous this evening, but to figure out how you can give more personally of your time and your talents. This is a problem that seems complex, but in many ways it's very, very simple. It's about money and resources for sure, but it's mostly about people taking the time to take care of others. And in particular, our young, who are the future of our country. You know, processing in my mind the fact that 25 to 40% of the future of our country aren't going to graduate from high school is a scary thought. And I hope you'll join me in my hope of civic engineering to help us try to reach out beyond that. I want to share one last set of thoughts with you, and I do this when I speak, pretty much every time I give a speech. There are 3 pillars to me that I've learned beyond my purpose, principles, and priorities. There are 3 pillars that to me are very, very important, and that I hope you'll consider in your mentorship of youth, and we can see how that's reflected in our youth at the Boys and Girls Club and in the Salvation Army. The first of those pillars is faith. Now, for me, faith is a religious idea for sure, but it goes way beyond that. If you look these kids in the eye when they first come into a club, the first thing you have to do is give them faith. You have to give them the ability to believe in themselves. Without that, the rest is really, really hard. And so many of these kids come to the club with no belief, no faith, and no support. So to me, faith is both a life pillar, but it's also a belief, the ability to give kids the confidence that they can make it happen. My second milestone and pillar is perseverance. Every person in this room has had obstacles in their life. Every person. And somehow you figured out how to overcome them. For our kids in the clubs, obstacles look like not road bumps, they look like giant walls. We have to figure out how to teach them to persevere, how to teach them to know that they can climb over those walls, knock them down, get a boost up from somebody else, and get to the next level. Faith, perseverance. The third pillar for me is serendipity, which may seem like an odd word. It's kind of an old-fashioned word. But to me, it's about opportunity and seeing opportunities that come before you. Now, I will tell one personal story. My wife's not here to defend herself, but I will tell one personal story. When I was a sophomore in college, I was in a dorm room, and I came back, and there was a message waiting for me next to the phone. Now, I'm old enough that some of you are as old as I am. Rotary dial telephones, remember those? The latest innovation was Post-it notes. So Post-it notes were brand new. And my roommate, who actually lives here in Winston-Salem, he's probably some of your dentists, left me a note. He said, Pauline called with a number. So I said to myself, well, that's interesting. I don't even know a Pauline. But being a 19-year-old male who wasn't dating anyone, I decided to call it. And so I called Pauline back, and it turned out she wanted a ride to Kiowa. Our families both vacation at Kiowa Island in South Carolina, but I couldn't give her a ride. But I said, this is kind of an opportunity. Sort of landed on my desk. So I called her when I got down to Kiowa, and next week we will celebrate our 29th anniversary. That is serendipity. And I will tell you, when you see kids in clubs, the idea that there's opportunity in front of them is difficult for them to see. And so as mentors and as support people, we have to figure out how to give them faith, teach them perseverance, and help them to see the serendipity that's in front of them that can change their lives in fundamental ways. So that's where we are. It's a tough problem. It's complicated. But this lost generation can be a found generation. We can help these kids, and I hope you'll join me tonight in helping them, in particular with our home reclamation project in Winston-Salem. Thank you very much. So now I got nominated to also ask you to look at your tables. Inside the program, you will find an opportunity to get to the good level of being a civic engineer and maybe the great level of being a civic engineer. Our goal for the evening is to raise $200,000 with sponsorships and the goodness of hearts of some major contributors. We've already raised $120,000. So we're well along our path, but we do need your support. And I really ask you to think about that, to think about deep in your heart what you plan to do, what you may have already done, and what you can possibly do. And reach out and make a commitment. Make a commitment to be engaged in these kids, make a commitment to tackling this lost generation and to helping their future. The Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club in Winston-Salem is a treasure for you. Something you need to nurture, something you need to help grow. And this is one way in which you can really reach out and help them grow. So, I leave you with that. You can fill it out tonight. I'm sure there will be people here who will gladly accept your forms tonight. If not, there's an envelope there. You can mail it in. Hopefully you can help us reach our goal of $200,000 and beyond so that we can continue to serve the youth in Winston-Salem. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you came tonight for an incredible meal or conversation with friends or a great big ball of inspiration, but I think you got all three tonight. So thank you very much. Once again, a hand for Robbie for that wonderful, heartfelt, and very personal message. And I think a lot of people can certainly relate to a lot of the message there. And one thing you can do is tell somebody else about it tomorrow. I heard this great speaker last night. Let me tell you about it. I think that'll certainly get the ball rolling, not only here, but on from here. I want to ask Major Allison to join us now for some final thoughts. Major.
Certainly, I want to say thank you to Brad and Fox 8 for tonight. While we're still asleep in the morning, Brad will be reporting the news. Thank you so much, Brad, for this evening and for what you do for the community and the whole triad, and your faithfulness to the truth and reporting the best news possible. Thank you so much. Also, I want to say thank you to Robbie. I asked Robbie if he'd come back. We have a little appreciation award we want to give you. having that
That's awesome.
signed by our club kids.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
God bless you.
Very much. It's really very cool.
And this year, our honorary co-chairs for the campaign, Bud and Zan Baker. Zan is exactly